All right. Cans on. Mic's up. Level's good. You got me over there? All right. Let's roll.
This is Booth to Booth, your direct line to the latest in home voiceover production, with your favorite home VO experts throughout the industry, across the internet, and all around the world. Booth to Booth is brought to you by the Narrowband Broadcast Network, NBBN. The focus is on you. By Andrew Scott Media, making your media matter. By BOOTHSTUFF, unique VO fashion and swag that's as loud and proud as you are. And by the kind support of our viewers and listeners all around the world via KOFI. KOFI, helping you give back to the creators that help you the most. The session clock is running and all the mics are hot. So let's patch in and get this session started. Here's your host, VO coach, narrator, and producer, Andrew Scott.
And hello and welcome to Booth to Booth. I am Andrew Scott, and today I am joined by actor Emily Lawrence. Now, Emily is an award-winning actor, writer, and audiobook narrator excellent, and a lot of titles to their credit, but also has some opinions that I'm currently interested in, and I'm sure you're interested in too. But thank you so much for joining me, Emily. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. For our viewers and listeners, why don't you give us a bit of a rundown, your origin story and how you got into voice acting?
Sure. Well, I studied acting in college. I went to NYU Tisch. I got a BFA in acting drama. And then I moved out to Los Angeles and was just kind of trying to find things to do to pay the bills. And I took a workshop that was like how to get into voiceover. And it went through all of the different kinds of voiceover, and among them was audiobooks. And it was really the only kind of voiceover I was all that interested in, but I just kind of, it just sounded really perfect. It was something I'd never considered before. I'd never listened to an audiobook, but I was just like, I've been reading my whole life and acting, and I knew I could do it. So I started on ACX. I got myself some basic VO gear in my closet, and within 6 months, I was doing it full time.
I am super happy and rather proud to hear that you, as well positioned and as accomplished as you are, did like so many of us do and started out in a closet.
Oh, for many years.
Right?
I didn't actually update from my, well, I had a USB mic to start, which was terrible, I'll admit. And then I had like a Rode mic that I used for my first 300 titles. And then I just never felt the need to quote upgrade. And then finally I was like, all right, I guess it's time.
After 350 books, maybe I can invest in myself. Let me guess,
Yeah.
You started out with a Rode NT1A.
I sure did.
Yeah.
And I didn't even buy it new. A friend gave it to me.
Oh, a performer after my own heart. My very first job that I ever got when I went full-time pro, I did with a used blue Snowball microphone that I got off of Craigslist for about $30.
Yep.
It's just one of those things where, again, and we keep on telling this to people, it doesn't take that much to get started, and it doesn't take that much to actually make progress and, of course, make money. About what year are we talking about where you got in? What was the year that you did your first title?
I don't really want to say that.
Hey, it's not going to be as long ago as me. You see all the gray hair? So.
It was about 10 years ago. I've been doing this for about 10 years.
Oh.
I just wanted to comment on what you said, that I personally don't think the tech is that important. I think that your performance is always going to matter more. However, I will say, as somebody who did my first maybe 50 titles in a really poorly treated space with a really shitty USB mic, don't do that to yourself.
Yeah,
it takes a long time for the algorithms to bury those. So I don't think you should be intimidated. I think that there is some barrier to entry. It's just not as high as you may think, but don't do the absolute bare minimum, because that
No,
Costs
and
also.
it is so much easier to start out with quality at a low price point now than it was when we first started. You and I started
Absolutely.
around about the same time. And I mean, yeah, as far as USB mics go, your options were all blue and often sounded like somebody was standing next to the microphone with tinfoil going kind of thing.
Yeah, it's terrible.
But now $150 will get you an absolutely fantastic broadcast quality microphone, USB or otherwise. And, your closet's your closet. But it's so much easier to get started by way of the technical.
Mm.
But let's talk about the not technical. Um, it's getting harder in our industry for people to break in, especially in things like long form narration and audiobooks.
Mhm.
How was your start? And talk to me about what you perceive to be some of your very early stumbling points,
Oh god, there were so many.
right?
I mean, I started, like I said, on ACX doing indie books. I mostly was doing romance. My very first book wasn't, but like almost all of them after were. And I think it's gotten more competitive now for sure. Um, I think some of my stumbling blocks were that I hadn't listened to audiobooks before doing this. I didn't necessarily know the medium. I just kind of jumped in and figured it out. And I did a
Right.
lot of figuring it out on
Yeah.
my own. And honestly, it took me years to learn things that like a coach could have told me in 20 seconds. So that take that for what it's worth. I also think that nowadays it's just there's so many more people doing it. I had the luxury of sort of figuring it out on the job because I wasn't competing against as many people. And like I said, I mean, within a few months, I was doing this full time. It was how I was paying my bills. Now, granted, I was a recent college graduate and my bills were very low compared to what most people's are, but
Super
like still,
convenient. Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know. I think that's kind of the difference to me is how competitive it is.
I find it interesting as a VO coach to hear somebody like you say it would have been so much easier with a coach. Yeah, I would
Oh,
have
sure.
gotten, yeah. And it's one of those things where for most of us who work in the industry or have for some period of time, we live in a world of metrics now where you can pull up your website or you can pull up Google searches or you can pull up your YouTube channel and see exactly your progress. And not only that, you can also have very effectively illustrated to you by way of a drop where a stumbling point was.
Mm,
And I would love to be able to do that with my career because I, like you, for the first year and a half, 2 years, I could very easily, if I had a chart in front of me of my career in voiceover, I could see the moment where I started working with my first coach.
mm,
I brought in a not inconsequential amount of talent. I was stage trained in opera singer, light opera, musical theater, and then I did work in broadcasting and all that business. So I had certain things that I was bringing in with me. But like you, a big part of what I didn't understand was the industry
mm,
and the industry at the tier I was stepping in on at one of those lower rungs of the ladder because honestly the rules kind of change as you go up and it was gratifying to hear somebody else mirroring what my experience was in getting in. I have a question from one of my Discord users. Anthony is actually really interested to know what your work process is and like what's your day look like and things like do you pre-read your scripts or do you do like me the terrible sin of reading a lot of it cold or do you record narration of do you record your VO of characters at the same time, or do you go track to track and do them separately? And all that business. Kind of what's your process?
Um, well, I don't personally know any narrators who don't narrate it all at once. Not that's not to say that they're not out there. But like, when you like, I just did a session this week where I was had a director for a Penguin Random House book, and they would absolutely not let me, stop and like, you have to be able to, when you're at that level anyway, you have to be able to do it all in flow. So I would recommend starting that way. I feel like that's kind of maybe an animation or video game or kind of a different world of voiceover where people have that habit of separating it out. But in audiobooks, as far as I know, we always go straight through everything and do it all at once. In terms of my process, I don't recommend cold reading.
What?
I definitely have cold read in the past, but I do not recommend it. Only
You did
under
it enough.
duress.
You did it enough times to go, man, this is not the way.
Yeah, all it takes is getting to page 300 and it throwing in like he says in his Scottish accent, and you're like,
Right. Exactly. I was just like, I'm supposed to be talking in a Bahamian accent at this whole time. I didn't even know that was a thing.
yeah.
So yeah, I've gotten bitten by that more than once.
It happens. So, and
Yeah.
it's also, honestly, I think my process is a lot about sort of sitting with it and thinking about the characters and the story and taking it in. And so like, I feel like you need to read it ahead of time, for me anyway. But I don't like read it right before. I don't actually prep my own books anymore. I hire someone to do it for me. But when I used to, and still when I hire someone to do it, I always try to finish it at least a week ahead of time, because when you're working with publishers, or even when you're working with authors, if you have to ask things like, hey, how do I pronounce this word that you made up? Or you say that this character has an accent, but it's a fantasy world. Did you have a particular accent in mind? Like these sorts of questions that really only the author can answer. You want to give them time to respond. And when you're working with publishers, it's like you have to ask your producer, who has to ask possibly like the author's agent before it gets to the author, and there's like this game of telephone, and it can take a week or more to get answers.
You can be four times removed from the answer, and you need to budget in the time for all those levels to come back to you and go, yes, you're supposed to sound like you're from Greece, but I know he's a Martian. I understand.
Right. It's not always possible, but I always aim for a week ahead of time before I'm going to start recording.
Well, and that interests me, and I generally do the same unless I'm doing something like I recently did for an online listening app, I did a reading of The Picture of Dorian Gray. Now, I've read The Picture of Dorian Gray probably a dozen times in my life, so really didn't need to research that one too much. But I find it interesting, one of the things that you self-disclose is that you love villains.
I do.
And yeah, it sounds like you like to sit with the material so that you can really get not only an intellectual feel for the characters that you're portraying, but you can kind of get a visceral sense of who am I, how am I going to embody this person?
Absolutely. Yeah. To me, I mean, audiobook narration is acting, full stop, whether it's fiction, nonfiction, whatever. And so to me, I want to give myself time to really get under the skin of my characters and like into the story. So yeah, like what you said, a visceral experience, to me, that's what narration is. Like, it like feel it in your gut. And if you're not, then you're not doing it right. As far as that's how I approach it.
Absolutely. I agree entirely. And I often, one of the things that I very frequently say to my followers is that voice actors are capital A actors, and voice artists are capital A artists.
Absolutely.
And trying to look at it like less than, or, oh, I'm not on stage, or that's not only counterproductive, but it's just flat out wrong.
Yeah. I mean, no one's looking at you. And luckily, if you make a mistake, you have the chance to go back and fix it and no one will know. But like, it's, you're providing your audience, your listeners, with hopefully an emotional experience, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, that it's art, full stop.
Yeah. And you're right. Luckily, nobody is looking at you, but unfortunately, nobody is looking at you as an actor.
You don't have your face to convey, to communicate. Yeah.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry about your eyes being seen on the back wall. It's both a blessing and a curse, because you're right. Everything that is the experience of the listeners provided by the narrator, unless you're in some big audio play type thing where they're doing Foley and sound effects, which is growing in market share, but it's certainly nowhere near what just a simple audiobook performance is. And yeah, if you're shaking in your boots, you need to sound like you're shaking in your boots.
Mhm.
So I'm again grateful to hear that you, as a trained actor, come at this from an actor's point of view, not minimizing, oh, this is just the audiobook thing.
Right.
This is me acting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So in your path into the world of voiceover, when did you suddenly realize, we were talking about the upgrade of microphone a little while ago, when did it kind of really settle into you that, oh, this is a thing that I do and I need to go all in and really, really pursue this? I think there's always a point in every beginning voice actor's career where they're kind of on the fence and they're like, yeah, I guess I could, but keeping the lights on right now is kind of nice. And I don't hate my boss, but when did it just suddenly dawn on you? Was there a particular title or job you did where you just went, this is who I am, I guess, and I'm going to be this way tomorrow, so might as well inhabit it?
It took me a long time, actually, because I was out here pursuing TV and film, and audiobooks were just a way to pay the bills. And frankly, I was working on material that I despised. and,
That
um,
happens? I didn't know that happens.
and so there was years where I was just like, I loved it because I love storytelling, but I hated the books. And
Right.
so, and there would be like the occasional gem that I would love, but generally my day-to-day experience was kind of like this sucks,
Slogging
And
through a
so,
bunch of ham-fisted writing by people who are self-publishing.
yeah, because I was working it honestly, because I was making a good living, and so it kind of felt like I was getting a lot of books that I would never have read personally for enjoyment, but like I was making a good living, and it felt like, why don't complain? This is your job, not every. And I was very grateful that I made my living as an actor, because I still always considered myself an actor, but it took me a few years to be like, I would really love this if the books didn't suck so much.
Yep. That's
And so
that's
then I
that's the
spent
short way of kernelizing that. I really love my job, I just don't like the parts of it that are terrible.
um and so and I shouldn't say that, because frankly there were, and I will be horrified if some of my like early authors see this. There were definitely some books that like I did enjoy. It was just the majority of them. So I kind of was like, well, what sort of books do I actually want to do? And it wasn't until I was like, you know what? I can pursue those books. And how can I change the way that I'm going about my career in order to have more of that and less of the things I don't like? That I started really taking it seriously and really like it becoming something that I really can just say that I love doing. And frankly, it took a really long time. It's only in the last few years that I don't have any books I hate. It took a really long time to get there. But it was definitely worth it.
You were in that place where it was the dichotomy of doing books because you have to versus doing books because you want to.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, everybody who starts getting a little bit of traction in the audiobook realm comes up to that Rubicon. They go, yeah, this guy is it's garbage. It sounds like it was written by a child, and the abuse of apostrophes really upsets me, but this guy's going to pay me $250 per finished hour, or I'm going to say no to that because I want to position myself to go after this title from a publishing house instead, or I'm in contact with an agent and they're making me wait. They're drawing the process out. But if I'm committed to garbage book and suddenly have to say, sure, I can start this a week from now, you roll those dice and you take that chance.
Right.
And I don't envy anybody who's in that position, but
Yeah.
at the same time, we all wind up in that position in this
Oh,
industry.
sure. And honestly, I don't, I always tell when I work with newer narrators, I always tell them, and like, some people have the luxury of slowly building a portfolio of the things that they love and inspire them to start. And I envy those people.
Right.
I think that if you can take the time and do this slow, like if you're retired and you have other income or whatever, and you're like, I can take a few years to build a portfolio and I don't need to make money right away. I mean, I sometimes wonder where my career would be like if I had done that from the start. But
Mhm.
most of us, I think, just kind of need to pay the bills. And when you need to pay the bills, you take whatever you can get. And it wasn't until it's a luxury to be in a position to be able to say no. And I know that I've been there. So it's like it took so long to be able to do that. But on the other hand, I will say that having built up a sizable portfolio, even though it was books I didn't really like or wasn't proud of, did really help me because when I first started approaching publishers, I had done 150 audiobooks before I ever worked with a publisher. And so I was able to go up to them and be like, hi, I have narrated 150 books. And from that, they know they can trust me, that I'm dependable, I'm a professional. And so I was able to make that transition really seamlessly and quickly once I worked toward it. But so I think that I just want people to know that they're both valid. Going through the muck and like suffering through the books you don't like to make a living, you can still get where you want to go. You just be patient.
Well, and the one thing to be said for independently produced books and their use in getting into the industry is, from a carpentry standpoint, nobody wants to start practicing woodworking with mahogany. You
Hmm.
start with pine and you
Sure.
work your way up. And I think, as you do, that's a really valid point of entry. And I I would hazard to say that the risk being taken on by you by way of performances also a little bit less. If you're going to be heard by a couple hundred or a couple thousand people, you can use that material to get your chops in order and refine as you go along. But also, like you, there comes a point where you have to decide. I mean, the only reason why I still have my truck and it hasn't been repossessed because of the amount of money that I didn't make when I started out is because my truck was already paid for, all $1,000 of it. Some people, you get forced into making those commitments, and that's still valid learning. I want to reinforce that to everybody listening and watching to us as well, that I'm a big fan of just start, get a mic, clean out a closet, but leave the clothes in it, get in there and just start working. Because you can sit here and you can analyze and you can prognosticate and you can fear all these things that we just talked about. But the only way to get by is through. So just start doing work and make sure to stay open for criticism, critique, and also keep your eye on where the market is. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but in the last 10 years, I've seen a dramatic shift in the audiobook market. And gosh knows the pandemic just blew it up,
Hmm.
you know. Speaking of, what was your experience of the pandemic, and how did it kind of cast into your business a little bit? Because I was underwater fast. Seriously, within a month of lockdown, I was busier than I'd ever been in my life. Did you
Oh,
see any noticeable change?
I mean, I don't think that the pandemic really work wise, I was already working from home and working with publishers. And so that didn't change too much. I think what did change is that it's actually more of what I was talking about earlier. I became less tolerant of things I didn't want to do because I think I was just shown how short life was. And
Sure.
so I just started saying no a lot more. And I actually, the pandemic was when I finally retired well, semi-retired my romance pseudonym. I still have a few authors I enjoy working with that I will still do romance for, but otherwise I haven't done romance in a few years now. And so things like that, where it was kind of like, no, I really like it's time. I had sort of dragged it on where I was afraid to, or I was afraid to say no. I was afraid to raise my rates with publishers, things like that. And finally, I was just like, life's too short. I'm doing it.
I
That's basically how the pandemic affected my work.
I find that a really interesting take because for people like me and my business, I do a lot of content that's used in streaming services and e-learning and things of that nature. So when everything shifted to online, people like me, we were suddenly beset. We were just like, I need to work on finding 29 hours in a day. But I'm encouraged to hear that you actually made a choice for yourself in no small part for your own mental health and
Absolutely.
your own well-being, going, no, you know what,
100%.
because so many people in that circumstance could have doubled down and said, oh, all the work's here, and spread themselves so thin for the dollar that they had nothing left to give. And I know one of the audiobooks that I did during the pandemic, aside from narrating my own book that I wrote, is I felt the impact of the emotional weight we were all under in my voice acting, in my
Mm,
read. And it really made me step back and go, wow, this is actually, I think the insular nature of what we're all going through right now is impacting what I can do on the microphone. And that's when I just got a hold of my clients that I was working with, and I said, I need to take some time away. I need to take a
good for
little bit of
you.
time so I can come back. And I think more voice actors and more people like us who work from home in tiny little boxes need to take time to get ourselves out of those boxes
Mhm.
and actually do the things that support us so that when we are in our little box, we can give it 100%.
Sure, totally. I mean, I am a really big proponent of a work-life balance because I think it makes you a better artist when you have, I mean, we creative people need the space to think and feel, and it's important. And so it's funny because while you were talking, I was thinking about how a lot of the decisions that I have made in my career were about deciding not to be afraid. And so I was thinking that there were like three, like deciding not to be afraid and pursuing what I loved. Those are like my two driving forces and that have made my career better. And so the two that make me think about fear have to do with money and being a, because I'm the primary breadwinner in my house. I'm, would like making a certain amount of money. And so when I decided to start saying no to things at the beginning of the pandemic, I was afraid about my income. And I'm kind of a numbers nerd. So I like looked through and was like, okay, if I didn't do every title that I didn't want to do last year, like how much money would I be sacrificing? Like all this stuff. And I did the numbers and I decided to go through with it anyway, or that it would be okay. And, um, but like the other thing I did was I also started asking for more money. And that's really the second time in my career. I think when I was back in my indie days, I was afraid to raise rates for a while and then got to a point where I was just like stressed out, overworked, and was like, okay, if I'm going to charge more money then. And every time I've done that, like I made more money. Like I started saying no to more projects, but I made more money that year than the year before. And because work smart, not hard, right? And
Right?
don't be afraid. Like know what you're worth, and know that you don't. We have a value in American culture of busyness,
Yeah.
but busyness is not necessarily goodness. It's not necessarily success or even happiness.
Or
It's just
productivity.
yeah, it's just being busy, and you can be
Mhm.
busy doing a lot of really stupid, unnecessary things. And so I just
Don't come over here on the weekends, okay, please?
so, I mean, to me, the last few years have been a lot about pruning away the things that don't serve me and pursuing the things that do. And giving myself the time and space to do it. So I only schedule audiobooks 3 weeks out of the month now, and I save a fourth week to do other things because I also write for TV and film. So I save a week for myself every month to write. Like, it's been a really good quality of life shift for me, and I understand that I'm in a very privileged place to be able to do that. And I worked a long time to be able to, but
I was just gonna say, you're in a privileged place, but not by accident.
Well, yeah, I mean, I worked hard, but I also think I could have done it sooner. And I think we all can to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, like, look, I've been at that place where you're like, I'm not going to make rent. I need to take whatever job I can. Like, I fully understand that. But I also think that there is a lot of times in our life where we can prioritize and we can make judgment shifts and we're afraid to. And so here's me saying, don't be afraid.
There you go. And with that, we're going to jump to a quick break. When we come back, we are going to be shifting focus just a little bit because I can see that darling cat with that thing around their neck out of the corner of my eye. But I'm Andrew Scott. This is Booth to Booth, and we will be right back with more from Emily. Don't go anywhere.
Booth to Booth is brought to you in part by BOOTHSTUFF.com, the home of the world's most unique VO casual fashion and swag. You know, this thing that we do is pretty unique. So, slap on a Booth Stuff t-shirt that tells the world, or, you know, your cat, that being in a tiny room by yourself is where you truly belong. Shirts, hats, pants, mugs, and more. Well, not a lot more. Actually, that's pretty much it, anyway. Booth Stuff is the one and only home for VO-centric swag that lets the world know what you do with that mouth of yours. So, head on over to BOOTHSTUFF.com and get something that shows the world who you are and what you love to do. BOOTHSTUFF.com. Loud and proud.
And hello and welcome back to Booth to Booth. I'm Andrew Scott, and I am talking today with Emily Lawrence. And Emily is a very accomplished voice actor and audiobook narrator. And we're going to shift over to what apparently is my favorite topic of the past couple weeks. So, a few ago, Apple quietly rolled out artificial AI audiobook narrators. Ta-da! I don't even think I'm going to put a sound effect in there. And it's creating quite a buzz. But the interesting thing is this buzz is not some fresh thing. Many of us in particularly the audiobook realm have been talking about this for years. I did my first examination of a text-to-speech and voice cloning service myself probably 4 years ago. And so this has been on the boil. This has been happening. And Emily, you have recently, in the last year and some, had comments in pieces by news outlets where you were asked about artificial intelligence, synthetic voices being used for audiobooks. Now, I'm not going to be so banal as to say, what are your thoughts? Because pretty confident that we share a similar tack on this. But with the announcement by Apple, and you know that all the other large tech platforms are working on this technology and have been. I guess my question to you is, how are you feeling about it right now? Step outside the intellectual analysis and tell me what the announcement from Apple kind of made you feel about what's going on in the industry.
Well, I think the biggest thing about the Apple announcement is that there were recognizable voices that were used as the source.
Yeah.
And so the audiobook community is really small, and I know those people personally. And many other audiobook narrators know them. And so there is a sense of betrayal. And so that is really upsetting. That kind of some of our own took the thinking of themselves first kind of route and got paid who knows how much and kind of sold the rest of us under river. Like that has its own really shitty
and
connotation.
I'm glad you brought that up because I don't think enough people understand that. And we probably share knowledge of at least one of those voices. And yeah, that's just it. There are a lot of us in the audiobook world and in the narration world who know the people who sold their voices
Mhm.
to Apple. And I tend to agree with you that there's a feeling of betrayal about this. And it takes my mind back to the recent TV series Battlestar Galactica with Who's the Cylon? Which one of you is going to be Judas Iscariot?
Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, this was going to happen.
Sure. I think, but that's the difference to me about the Apple thing, because there have been, Speech Key and other companies that have been doing this for years. But the difference here was that these were prominent members of the community that we all know and that have had very wonderful, illustrious careers, some of them anyway. And so it's like, it just feels different. It feels more personal. It feels like it's happening in your own backyard as opposed to, some random other place. So it feels more personal. But otherwise, I mean, other than that, I don't feel much of a difference about the Apple announcement compared to SpeechKey or anyone else. I think that this has been happening for years, and it's been a topic of conversation for years. And the only difference with Apple versus anything else was that it was a larger company, not some small startup. It was a major company with the money to do it. But like we knew that. Like I personally knew that was happening. I knew that Apple was working on it and Amazon's working on it. I knew that Google is. Like these aren't secrets. And so it was just kind of a matter of time on that front. But the thing that was different about Apple was recognizing those voices. That was, you know.
Yeah, and again, I happen to personally and professionally agree with you. That begs the question. And now, I mean, I'm not approaching you as an expert on artificial intelligence and synthetic voices. Neither
Mhm.
one of us are.
No.
I'm very fortunate to say that I'm going to actually have an actual expert about AI and voice technology coming up on my next show. Because no matter how long I've been in this industry, I feel like I need to talk to a grown up about this. And so I'm going to be doing that. But, I one of my users on Discord, Dustin, asks, with the fast, inevitable approach of artificial intelligence, it's looking like the reality is coming, if not already here. There's a good chance that voice piracy is going to become a phenomena.
Mm.
Are you concerned about that? Are you concerned
Sure.
about somebody stealing your voice? And if so, are there things that talents can do to protect themselves from that?
Well, absolutely. You can look at the contracts that you sign and make sure that you are not just granting the right to use your voice in all formats in perpetuity, all that legalese stuff. That I mean, and I'm speaking of this secondhand, and I could be like miss speaking certain facts, but that's
Don't
how
worry,
these
I have a disclaimer at the beginning of the show.
okay.
You're covered. It's
Um,
fine.
but that's how the voice of Siri happened, is that the person who was the voice of Siri, she did a contract where she granted them the right to use her voice in perpetuity in all formats, and she got paid for that job, but then they sold those sound files to Apple, and then they made Siri without paying her a cent. And she sued
Yeah.
and she lost because it was legal, because she had signed that
Yeah.
contract.
Yeah,
So
I
that's
always tell people
bullshit.
full FBO, full buyout. Full buyout is dangerous.
Yes.
And you really do need to mind your P's and Q's with that.
Yeah. And so a lot of that is just sort of standard legalese. That's how people protect themselves, but push back on it. I mean, a lot of publishers that I work with have that in standard contracts. And I have said to them, I need this reworded or I'm not signing it.
Hmm.
And they do. They either reword it or they don't make me sign it. So,
There you go. And that's just it. A lot of larger companies and even smaller independent authors will try to push terms and conditions on you that nobody in their right mind should agree to.
mhm.
And it is surprising to many people that you can get out of that or at least get by or past that just by saying, no, let's
Yeah,
redo this part
we
here.
changed this section and read your contracts. A lot of people don't bother. Read
Oh,
them in the
yeah.
first place because this stuff's in there.
Yeah, I spend a not insignificant part of my week talking to my students, bringing me contracts and saying, "Yeah, no, you don't want that one. No, that one smells from here through the monitor.
Yeah.
No." Reading your contract and again, standing your ground, because it only takes, as you illustrated by talking about Siri, it only takes one contract where you don't perform true due diligence on your own behalf. Could you imagine what that woman would be worth right now if she
Mhm.
got one fraction of 1 cent every time Siri's name was mentioned? Good
Mhm.
grief.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the other thing that this brings me to, though, is the importance of building personal relationships with the people or the representatives of the companies that you work with. Talk to me a little bit about how you view client relationships and how you use a solid client relationship to protect yourself by way of business.
Well, I definitely use client relationships to get work. What do you mean by protecting myself?
I
You mean in terms
guess,
of the AI stuff?
well, I guess what I'm saying is, has there ever been a circumstance where even though you've worked for a client in the past, you suddenly started getting a feeling that you probably weren't a fit for their business model anymore?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
That's kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
This, having a sense of your client, not just the words on the page and where to put your PDF signature. A real sense of who you're working for.
Yeah, no, some people are scumbags.
Boy, you
And
got to that quick.
some people are just, in it for themselves, out to make a buck. They'll take advantage of you. I had one author who I did 20 something books for, and it was somebody that I never enjoyed working with because of the quality of the content. And so she came back to me after a while, and she offered me a book at a rate, and I was just kind of like, you know what, I'm not interested. I mean, I can't do that. I'm not interested in working with you anymore. And she ended up hiring another narrator who I know. And I found out, and I kind of approached her because this was a newer narrator. And I found out that this author underbid her by she offered her over $100 per finished hour less than she was willing to pay me, and she claimed she couldn't afford to pay more.
Yeah.
So, and this person always was like, "Oh, I have health issues. I've been in and out of the hospital." She was always kind of like that, but she was willing to pay me X amount and willing to pay this other narrator $100 less.
Yeah. So
You know,
she was willing to lie to you up here, and she was willing to lie to them down there.
right, right.
Yeah. And
So
you're right. Yeah, that unfortunately we do tend to forget in this day of digital distance that you are dealing with people, and you're dealing with fallible
yeah,
creatures who make some terrible decisions for selfish reasons sometimes, and you
absolutely,
do need to protect yourself against
yeah.
that.
But before we move on too much
Yeah,
from
please.
the idea of protecting yourself, I do have to say that one of the best ways to protect yourself is to work under SAG-AFTRA contracts. I know that that's not a popular thing to say with everyone, but as a union, they work protections into the contracts, and then if something goes wrong and you need to sue someone, they cover the cost, and they
Yes.
take on the brunt of the burden of protecting all of us. And so just working on, even if you're not a union member, working under a union contract, either through a union paymaster or with a union publisher, you're protected. And
Yeah,
if something happens, the union's got your back, because even if you're not a member, it affects everybody who works those contracts. So
absolutely.
the union is a powerful tool to protect us against this, and it's really worth saying, even if you're new in your career and you're not a member yet, it's definitely something to work toward if this is something you're scared about.
Well, since you brought it up, and number one, I am a longtime union supporter, let's speak to that, because that is a big question to many beginning talents. They know that there are unions out there. They have questions about unions. Hopefully, at some point in the future, I'll have a SAG-AFTRA representative on to talk about the union. But you, I imagine, were able to work union because you were a performing actor.
No, I joined SAG after I started doing audiobooks.
So there you go. That is exactly what I was going to ask
Yeah.
is, were you one of those people? Because, I live in Portland, Oregon, and we shoot a lot of TV shows here. So I have tons of friends who are SAG-AFTRA because they wound up being body number 7 in a coffee shop shot during a filming of Portlandia. And so they're in that way, and they had the luxury of being able to keep up their dues and stay vested. How did you get into SAG-AFTRA from just doing audio work? Because I think that's going to be very interesting to a lot of people.
Sure.
I don't think they know that that's a possibility.
I actually, I joined through doing like short films and things like that, but you can join just by doing audiobooks. All you have to do is do like an ACX or any indie book under a union contract. And the way you do that is you reach out to a union paymaster, and the union paymaster just like once you have a union paymaster pay you, then they have SAG-AFTRA health and retirement taken out of it. Boom. It has to be 200, I think they just upped it to $260 per finished hour has to be the minimum that you're charging. But as long as you're charging that and you go through a union paymaster, you're eligible to join. That's it. It's actually very easy to join with audiobooks. And I have my health insurance, not to sound like an advertisement, but like I'm a very proud union member. My health insurance is through the union. I invested in my retirement and like will be able to retire someday, because I'm a union member. It's the protections against this other stuff that we've been talking about. There's a whole community of union members. I do think it's something to work towards. Now, I didn't join for several years because I was new. I wasn't making enough money where it made sense to, but I think at a certain point, everybody, whether you're working with publishers or you're indie or whatever, everybody benefits from the negotiating that our union does on our behalf. And so to me, paying them 1% of my income is a really fair trade.
And I don't think that enough people and nascent talents understand just what of value you get back for union membership. And they think that it's super expensive and you're going to be throttled in how much you earn. It none of that stuff is true. But interestingly, I also pretty much to the man or woman, I don't know a union talent who turns their nose down at smaller people who are getting in like we did, where it wasn't cost effective then, but almost all of those union talents will say, as soon as you possibly can, do it, and do it for yourself. So let's talk about ACX a little bit. It sure has changed in the years that we've been doing audiobooks there. And I imagine you don't spend much time in ACX anymore.
No.
Yeah, I figured that was a safe bet. I have my user Colin asks, so Audible, for better or worse, kind of has an unhealthy monopoly on the audiobook market. I would kind of disagree with that. I'm a big supporter. Like my audiobook is available on a different channel through a different platform. And I think a lot of talents don't understand that there is more than just Audible. But in fairness, that's the bulk.
They absolutely do have
of
a
the market.
large market share. Yeah.
Yep. So ACX now, back 10 years ago, ACX was actually a pretty serious going concern, and you could make a decent amount of money doing books on ACX. But now it kind of feels like a backwater afterthought on Audible, that, yeah, they own it. But, I envision the ACX offices as like down in the basement, and it's got a bunch of cardboard boxes in it now and one small computer in the corner.
I don't think that's true.
Probably not, but I like to think that.
Well,
right.
I will say that when we started, there was only ACX.
Right? Yeah.
There wasn't Findaway. There wasn't. I mean, now there are so many, Spoken Realms. I think Audiobooks Unleashed. Like, there's so many other ways to distribute an
Authors
audiobook
Republic, now. And sure, yeah, absolutely.
There's so many other ways to do it, and so that actually is a difference. That actually Audible does not have a monopoly in the indie world now because of that.
No.
But I know the question is going to be like, how do you still get work now that there's fewer things? I feel like there's not as much post on ACX as there used to be. I
might put up a screenshot of my questionnaire here because you pretty much just paraphrased what I was going to ask you. What are the alternatives? What are the different avenues? Because you're right, it used to be that was pretty much it. You either work through ACX or you already were embedded with a publishing house who was giving, was suddenly pursuing audiobooks because it was like to them this whole new thing, even though it's not. So what are some of the alternative avenues?
Well, like I said, for indie stuff, there's Find a Way. Um, Authors Republic, Audiobooks Unleashed, and Spoken Realms, you have to bring the project to them. But there
Mhm.
is also so many small publishers now, like indie audiobook publishers, that this is just happening in the last few years. And they're almost all narrator run.
Oh yeah.
Narrators who have started indie audio publishers like Pink Flamingo or Spectrum. And these are places where they're narrators, they're willing to hire new narrators of a certain quality, So
Mhm.
um, so there's actually a lot more ways to find work now than there even was before. It was all just ACX. But really, I think the most dependable way is to reach out to authors and get the work yourself. Network, go to events, go
Yeah.
to conferences, meet people in real life.
And we can do that again now in 3D. Just wear your mask.
Right.
Um,
Agreed.
but you're right, and I think that is a big missing piece of a lot of people's puzzles. Is we think too narrowly by way of how I communicate with people. How am I going to get the word out? I mean, when I started 9 and some years ago, I bought 500 business cards. I have 480 of them now, probably,
Yeah.
because it's not really what we do. But at the same time, I've had great success as you reaching out to an author. I heard an author talking about one of their books on one of the largest podcasts in the world. And I just flat up did a little bit of digging, found a contact point, and said, "Hi, I want to narrate your audiobook." And before you know it, it was in the can. And, it was for a reputable publisher. It just so happened to be a reputable publisher that actually listened to the author when the
Mhm.
author said, "Hey, I want this guy to do it." And that is at times a barrier.
Yeah.
But,
It
you
happens
know,
though. That's how I got my very first book with a publisher because an author that I had built a relationship with on ACX got picked up by a publisher and requested me.
did that kick open a door for you? Do you
Oh,
think? Was
sure.
that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Once you have
And
your first publisher book, it's really easy to get the next one.
kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
it's like you got to know a guy, but I happen to have worked for a guy or gal. So
Yeah.
good. So, as we kind of wrap up here and go out, return again to this topic of artificial intelligence, neither you nor I are going to come anywhere close to saying we're fearing for our jobs. But what I'm having a hard time, I think that I'm kind of looking a little bit like my hair's on fire or chicken littling things about it. But I don't think either you or I are questioning that it's not just coming, it's started, it's here, it's
Mhm.
happening. And for us, ugly bags of mostly water, to borrow a term from Star Trek, um, a time is coming where a lot of the work, especially the low tier entry level work, is going to be taken up by AI because so many of these content authors would much rather just hit a button at a much lower cost point than deal with the complexities of a human being. I'm not asking you to defend humanity in front of the rise of the robots, but what I'd like to know is what do you believe? What is your greatest fear about what's happening right now, and how do you think we can best address that?
Um, it's funny because my fear is not really for myself. Um, I feel perhaps naively that I'm at a certain point in my career where even if the top 5% of books went to, 95% of books were done by robots and only 5% of books were by humans, I feel like I'd be able to get something in that 5%. I don't know how much, but um my fear is less for myself. It's actually more for like, and I feel like this may sound melodramatic, but like it's for like our souls, our sense of selves as humans. Because to me, what we do is art. And it's what we do is we express the human condition. Literature is has always been a way to communicate your thoughts, your feelings with people who are nowhere near you, who may not even be alive yet, who hundreds of miles away, and there's so much power in that. And to me, to have the humanity of the written word or the spoken word stripped away, like there's just something so violating about that. To me, it's not even my career that I'm concerned for. It's like when we are stripped of our ability to be human, what are we actually left with? And I think that to me has a lot to do with a general devaluing of art in our culture, and how people mostly just see it as like a way to space out, and it's not necessarily, not everything out there is of the best quality, and that also, so the more crap is out there, the easier it is to treat everything as crap. But like,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's kind of my biggest fear is like a devaluing of human expression, full stop.
Well, and number one, I agree wholeheartedly. And number two, I tend to point people back to, we all, and I'm speaking about it like it's in the past when it's not. But, throughout the pandemic, when everything went sideways on us and we were all locked away in our tiny little boxes, I tend to
Mhm.
remind people, where did you turn?
Yeah,
Where did you
absolutely.
turn when it got absolutely mental and
Mhm.
you even feared opening your front door to get your delivered food? You turned to art.
Mhm.
You turned to music. You turned to audiobooks. God knows so many people turn to audiobooks.
Mhm.
And I agree with you that one of the things that is going to keep us meat bags recording audiobooks is, yeah, they can be 100% accurate. They can be indistinguishable from a human voice. But there's something beautiful and ephemeral about listening to somebody and going, they felt that. I could feel them feel the words that they were saying into that microphone. And
Mhm.
it would be a less experience if you knew that that wasn't happening, that
Yeah,
it was the best AI voice in the world, and it might have kindled something in you and made you feel a little something, but you're not gonna have that back and forth. We tend to think that audiobooks are just consuming. They're not. There actually is a share that happens there, an intimacy
absolutely.
that happens, and if that's
Mhm.
gone, man, I'll take the asteroid.
Yeah.
Let's just get it over
I
with.
fully agree. I mean, like, it's funny, as much as there were books that I did for many years that I absolutely hated, like, I have had people who listened to romance books or whatever reach out to me and say, like, I have this horrible job and you help me get through the day and like blah, blah, blah. Like there is so much meaning in what we do. Um, and I mean, that's actually what I was going to say when you said, like, what can we do about it? We can be human. The more human that we are, a robot can't touch that. It can simulate it, but it's hollow. A robot
Yeah.
has no heart. Currently it has no soul, like,
Right? What time
um,
is it? Yeah.
like, I think that, that this is always what when people work with me on audiobook performance, this is always what I tell them is be real, be honest, be truthful, be vulnerable, because an AI can't do that. An AI
Mhm.
it can be word perfect and it can speak in a nice tone that's easy to understand, but you know what? A lot of people can do that too.
Right?
And what really makes a work, a book, whatever come to life is embodying that, bringing yourself to it. You know, reading that book in such a way that like nobody else could read it that way because it's coming from you. It's coming from something real and visceral and authentic and vulnerable. And that's what I strive to do when I'm working, because one, it's more fun and I enjoy it more. But two, that that's not only how I'm gonna, I think, keep my job, but also how I'm gonna keep finding meaning in a world that is determined to be really shitty a lot of the time. And
Amen. I won't even beep that out. It's my show. I can do what I want.
oh, I didn't know I wasn't supposed to be cursing. I'm
You
sorry.
know, you are more than welcome to curse. I always make sure I check the little box that says, "No, this is not made for children," so we're all in the clear, and this is grown-up time. And I agree with you that, again, when the world gets shitty, and there's plenty of it to go around, Going to art has been the reason, honestly, and I'm not overstating this, going back to art is the reason why I'm still here. It's the reason why I'm on YouTube. It's the reason why I wrote my book, in order to help people try to take a crack at this industry as well. Because this industry, unlike so many others, is so rewarding when it comes to being able to have artistic expression and giving voice. One of my big things is I do a lot of work giving voice to those people who either don't have a voice or whose voice has been diminished in the public, in order to bring their message out. And that is an incredibly empowering feeling, and it is also an incredibly humbling feeling. And, not all of us voice actors got some ego in the room with us. But I've found that the best voice actors are the ones who are humbled by their roles and humbled by their positions, because that's the special sauce in the read that you feel. You don't hear it, you feel it. And that's what makes listening to a good storyteller like you a magical experience, not just an audio experience. So I want to personally thank you so much, Emily. Do me a favor, and do everybody that's listening and watching a favor. Do the socials thing. Where can people find you, find information on you? And of course, if you're a publishing house and you're looking for an absolutely fantastic world-class narrator, who would they be getting a hold of?
My website is emilylawrence.com.
That's unique.
And then my socials are fairly easy on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. It's Emily Lawrence Creates. And on Twitter, it's Emily Lawr, L-A-W-R.
Emily, thank you so very much. Emily Lawrence, of course, is a fantastic audiobook narrator and actor. And I am Andrew Scott, and this has been Booth to Booth. We will see you next time, everybody. Take care, and bye-bye.
From the beautiful Pacific Northwest, this has been Booth to Booth with Andrew Scott. Booth to Booth is a narrowband broadcast network production in association with AndrewScottMedia.com. Andrew Scott, executive producer. Our theme music was written and produced by Ron Kajawa. Website design and maintenance by Vacano Creative. Christopher Vacano, webmaster. Available at VacanoCreative.com. Audio and video production by Andrew Scott. Available at AndrewScottMedia.com. Got topic ideas, questions, or comments for the show? Email us at patchin@booth2booth.com or by simply clicking the link in the description. On behalf of host Andrew Scott, I'm Eric Murray. From our booth to yours, thanks for joining us. See you next time on Booth to Booth.
Oh my God, is that cat wearing a collar of shame? I'm sorry. Yeah, we have to break the interview for cats. Oh, there we go.
It's a pineapple.
Oh, I think I'm dead.
NBBN.
The Narrowband Broadcast Network.
The focus is on you.